and welcome to another episode of Disasters in History. Today we're going to talk about disasters that happened this week of October 6th to October 12th. Without further ado, let's get started. On October 6th, 1854, a small fire started in a factory along the banks of the River Tyne in Gateshead, England. The building in question was a 7-story structure that created warsteads. Essentially, a warstead was an old primarily male clothing material made out of cotton and several other materials that was very popular at the time. The fire started in the upper floors of the building from an unknown source. As the fire burned, the fire brigade attempted to prevent it from spreading, but due to radiative heat, it ignited a warehouse full of sulfur next door. The sulfur quickly began to melt and produce a blue flame, which spread out the windows and ran down the sides of the building. Fearing the rapidly flowing sulfur would spread the fire to other buildings, the fire brigade moved to the warehouse, leaving the factory to burn. Because of the rapidly spreading fire, thousands of spectators from Gateshead and Newcastle, directly across the River Tyne, showed up and attempted to watch the fire. It was at this moment that everyone should have known things were going to go horrifically wrong, as a small explosion occurred, but no one paid any attention to it. A second explosion then occurred inside the warehouse, and that was also ignored. Finally, a massive explosion erupted from the basement of the warehouse, lifting boats in the river out of the water, sending massive pieces of stone flying nearly a full mile away, collapsing houses in the surrounding area, and generally just causing a massive amount of mayhem. Amongst the debris, the fire began to spread through Gateshead. But not just Gateshead, the explosion sent embers across the river to Newcastle, and it began to spread through the city of Newcastle. Over the next several hours, firefighters fought the fire and created fire breaks throughout both cities in an attempt to prevent the complete destruction of both of them. Once the fire was fully extinguished, the death toll stood at 53 people, with hundreds more injured. Now, it's likely that the death toll from this disaster was higher than 53 people. The record keeping of deaths of certain individuals any time before like 1920 was less than great. So it's likely that the death toll was higher. Foreigners were often not included in death tolls, and several other, people that didn't have homes, orphans, things like that were generally not included in the death toll. If no one came and claimed them, they were kind of forgotten about. So, an investigation was launched into the cause of the explosion in the warehouse. It was believed at the time that sulfur and sodium nitrate, the two items stored inside the warehouse, do not explode. And they were half right. Sulfur does not explode when burning, but when sodium nitrate is exposed to sufficient heat for a long enough time, it can cause an explosion. Specifically, that extensive heat is about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit for an extended period of time. Now, what that extended period of time is depends on the amount of sodium nitrate and a whole lot of other factors. But generally, if you expose sodium nitrate to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for a long period of time, it will eventually explode, especially when hit with some sort of mechanical impact. And the reason that this is likely what caused this explosion is this particular warehouse had been specifically built with different material to make it fireproof, or at least as fireproof as it can be in 1854. And that material would have been very heavy. And as the warehouse began to collapse, because firefighters couldn't make entry inside because, number one, it's 1854 and they don't have SCBAs, so being able to breathe inside that warehouse would have been next to impossible anyway. In addition, the amount of sulfur that was in the building burning for that period of time would have caused extensive structural issues in that building, and it would have slowly collapsed. So they would have been attempting to apply water from the exterior of the building, and those heavier materials it was built with, because everything that is fireproof is heavier than usual, as it collapsed down, it likely was enough of a mechanical impact, a mechanical shock to that sodium nitrate to cause the explosion. The actual sodium nitrate is used in a lot of explosives now to help. It's an oxidizer, so it helps fires burn even hotter and more vigorously. So in addition to the warehouse burning itself, the sulfur burning, that sodium nitrate would have assisted in creating a bigger fire for inside that warehouse before eventually exploding. Now, I wanted to real quick give you an idea of what you're looking at for this particular disaster. So we're going to open up our map here on Google Earth. So this is Newcastle and Gateshead. So we have Gateshead here on, let me reset to north here real quick so I don't give you, okay. Newcastle is north of the River Tyne, Gateshead is south of the River Tyne. And if we zoom in here, the fire started on the Gateshead side of the river. So it would have been along this area. This is where our first location of the fire occurred. And it would have started in that worsted warehouse. Now, because that is a clothing factory and it was 7 stories tall, there is going to be a significant amount of available combustibles to burn. That is going to burn for an extended period of time. It's going to burn incredibly hot. So that's probably why it was able to produce so much radiative heat to allow it to spread to other warehouses. The fire would have burned up into, let me erase my thing here, would have started down around here, would have spread this direction. And then when the explosion happened, it blew material across the river, all the way across the River Tyne, and started burning all the way down in this area, all the way down in this area, and then continued burning in Gateshead all the way down around here. Now, basically at this point, the primary form of firefighting for the fire brigade here in Newcastle and Gateshead would have been fire breaks. They would have been pulling down houses. They would have been using dynamite to blow up houses to try and create fire breaks in this city. And they were relatively successful in Newcastle. The fire in Gateshead did rekindle multiple times, and they had to fight it multiple times. But in the end, they were eventually able to extinguish the fire. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that after the fire actually occurred, there was only one building along the river that was still standing in this general vicinity. It's actually still standing to this day. It's the only remaining building from that time that still stands in Newcastle or Gateshead. Our next disaster here is Swissair Flight 316. On October 7th, 1979, Swissair Flight 316 was traveling from Zurich, Switzerland to Beijing, China, with planned stops in Athens, Greece, and Mumbai, India. The first leg of the flight was operating as normal, and the flight descended into Athens with 0 problems. But as they were going to land, the pilots landed the plane too far along the runway at 168 miles per hour, well higher than was mandated for landing. Because of this, the plane was unable to stop in time, overshot the runway, and landed on a public road where the wing and tail separated and a fire began. In total, 14 people died in the disaster. Now, one of the interesting parts about this crash is the plane was carrying approximately 1,000 pounds of various radioactive isotopes. In addition, a doctor that was on board, of which there were several doctors because they were traveling to a conference in Mumbai, was carrying a small amount of plutonium in his luggage that was lost for a short period of time. Because of the fire and the evacuation of everyone on board, they lost the plutonium that he had apparently decided to carry in his luggage. Now, prior to, 1945, I would say carrying plutonium in your luggage isn't that shocking of a thing, but this was 1979. Deciding to put plutonium in your luggage on a flight, on a commercial flight, no less, is a weird choice. And there were a lot of plane crashes in the 70s and 80s, the 60s. That's a interesting decision by this particular doctor. Now, in the aftermath of this particular disaster, the pilot and co-pilot were charged with multiple crimes and arrested by Greek authorities. At trial, they were found guilty of manslaughter with negligence, causing multiple bodily injury, and obstructing air traffic. The pilot received 5 years in prison, and the co-pilot received 2.5 years in prison. But they ended up being set free on bail and then substituted fines in place of jail time. Now, neither of them flew a plane after the disaster, but they both remained employed by Swissair for the rest of their careers. Moving on to our next disaster, we have the Peshtigo Fire. On October 8th, 1871, a cold front swept through the Great Lakes region of the United States, bringing a massive amount of wind to a tender, dry area. At the same time, several slash and burn fires to clear land were burning around the town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin, and quickly grew out of control into a large wildfire. As the fire spread, it quickly turned into a massive firestorm with a potential fire tornado. Multiple witnesses that survived the fire stated a large column of rotating fire lifted trees and homes and tossed them aside. Now, if you followed me on other social media, I've talked extensively about fire tornadoes and the differences between what is a fire whirl and what is a fire tornado. So real quick to cover this so that we can, have a general idea. If you have a fire, it is, let's say it's burning right here. You have your fire, draw my fire here, like that. The bottom portion of this fire right here is going to be a low pressure because as this fire burns, it's dispersing heat up this direction, right? Heat rises. That is naturally going to displace the heated air upwards and create a lower pressure at the base of this fire. As such, the exterior of this fire is going to be high pressure all the way around. That is going to draw or push air from your high pressure area to your low pressure area. As this moves, it's going to slowly start to rotate around your fire, like such, because it doesn't pull it directly and it rotates. Now, if you get a bunch of these fires all in one area, so let's say you have fire here, a fire over here, a fire up here, right? All of these have low pressures. There's a low pressure here, there's a low pressure here, there's a low pressure here, right? All of these separate fires are going to all be different low pressures. And if you think about a town, so the thing with wildfires is it's not one giant fire that's burning. When you get into that urban area, which the town of Peshtigo would have been a more urban area, each individual home is its own separate fire. So you have all of these fires. All of these are different homes on fire. All of them have their own separate low pressure system and such are surrounded by high pressure that's pulling air in, right? All the way around. My H's are really bad. Including in the middle. But as these fires start to pull in air because this low pressure is getting lower and lower at the base of these fires, starts to pull it in, it's going to pull in from all of the areas around it as well as the area in between all of the fires. So this is going to go from a high pressure, and as this fire starts to burn and gets hotter, this is also going to become a low pressure because you're not going to be pulling in more oxygen from the outside. So it's going to all start rotating like such. That's how you get a firestorm. Essentially, all of the outside air, all of the high pressure outside of this big low pressure in the inside of all of these fires is being fed by the pressures on the outside. Now, that is a firestorm. But with a fire tornado is you have all of these fires burning, right? Let me get rid of some of this. You have all of these fires burning. All of these fires are going to be producing smoke. It's purple because my chroma key does not like black. So all of these are going to be producing smoke. What is smoke if not unburned fuel? But there's going to be very, very small particulates of unburned smoke. Now, as these are going up, all of this smoke is full of very small unburned particulates. As they go up, as this fire gets bigger and bigger, it's going to eventually reach the point where it will go up into the atmosphere, and water vapor up in the atmosphere is going to adhere to these tiny particles of dust and smoke, unburned fuel, because that's how condensation works. It condenses to dust and whatever else is in the atmosphere and creates essentially a pyrocumulonimbus cloud, which, if this fire continues to burn at a high rate, can produce a proper fire tornado. Now, you can get fire whirls where you have, again, your low pressure. It's kind of swirls around like that. They're really small. A proper fire tornado is one that goes all the way up to the cloud base and is formed similarly to an actual tornado rather than similar to a dust devil, which is ground up. Proper fire tornadoes, actual tornadoes, are cloud base down versus ground up. Now, the reason that this is likely an actual fire tornado and not just a fire whirl is because there are numerous reports of houses, trees, people being picked up and tossed by this particular fire tornado. Usually fire whirls are relatively weak and very, very short-lived. Usually if you have a proper fire tornado, it will cause actual damage, and it lasts longer than a fire whirl. It'll also be significantly bigger. So it's likely that the Peshtigo fire had an actual fire tornado versus just a fire whirl. Now, moving on to the rest of the Peshtigo disaster. As the fire pushed into the town of Peshtigo and turned into a raging firestorm, with temperatures likely nearing 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the residents of Peshtigo had only one hope: diving into the Peshtigo River. There, they attempted to ride out the fire by diving underneath the water as it got hot, popping back up, waiting until it got so unbearable they had to go back underneath it, diving back down, popping back up over and over and over again. In the town of approximately 1,500 people pre-fire of Peshtigo, only about 700 people lived through the fire. One man attempted to escape with his family on a covered wagon, but as they were fleeing, the wagon wheel broke. When he got out of the wagon to see what happened, the horse pulling the wagon caught on fire. Then he turned around, and the covered wagon that was pulling his whole family was on fire with his family burning to death inside. The entire family burned to death on the road. One man attempted to flee with his children, but realized that they would not make it and slit their throats before he burned to death. Several men and women were trampled by a herd of cattle running to the river in a desperate attempt to survive. In total, the Peshtigo fire would completely destroy 17 towns in Wisconsin. The official death toll is approximately 1,500 people, but that death toll is likely at least 1,000 people too low, as numerous mass graves have been discovered in the decades since. Entire families were completely killed, with all records completely burnt in the lost towns. Now, if we look at a map here real quick of Peshtigo, the area around Peshtigo, I should say. So here we have Wisconsin right here. Peshtigo sits right there. You can see the Peshtigo River running right here. The area that burned during the Peshtigo fire is approximately, so it didn't quite reach down to Green Bay, but it was about right in this area here. And then there was a separate fire that burned over in this area almost up to here. So it burned this whole area, approximately 1.5 to 2 million total acres in Wisconsin. Now, the interesting part of this was the same day as the Great Chicago Fire. The Great Chicago Fire got significantly more coverage, despite the fact that the death toll from the Peshtigo Fire was 5 times that of the death toll of the Great Chicago Fire, specifically because, well, it was Chicago and this fire burned rural Wisconsin. And so the other issue is there was not much news that actually made it out of the Peshtigo area because, well, everyone was dead. And the majority of towns were completely burned away. It would take a while before anyone would figure out that there was significant fire damage up here, because there were also numerous fires that were burning in Michigan as well as up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Now, the cause for the Peshtigo fire was there were numerous slash and burn fires that were burning all throughout Wisconsin on that day. The cold front moved in with 100-mile-per-hour winds, and it basically hit a completely dry area, and it was going to take off regardless. Now, There has been a number of causes put forth of why the fire happened across Wisconsin and Michigan and even the Great Chicago Fire, one of which is a crazy one that a comet went by and comet debris came down and set fires all across Wisconsin. There has never been a confirmed report of anything from space causing a fire. And there were already numerous fires burning that day. It's a confirmed fact. They regularly use slash and burn for agriculture, clearing lines for railroads, all of that kind of thing. There were plenty of fires burning to be able to make this disaster happen. Our next disaster this week is the Vajont Dam Disaster. On October 9th, 1963, approximately 2 kilometers, about 1.2 square miles, consisting of around 260 million cubic meters of the Monte-Tonk Mountain, slid down into the lake that had been created by the Vajont Dam at around 110 kilometers per hour, which is about 68 miles per hour. This mass of debris completely displaced the entire reservoir of water behind the dam, causing 115 billion liters, approximately 30 billion gallons, to rush towards the dam. Of that amount of water, 50 billion liters, 13 billion gallons, overtopped the dam in a wave that was at least 250 meters high that immediately came crashing down the valley at an incredibly fast pace. The massive wave crashing down the mountain wiped away the entire town of Longarone, with the only remaining structures the bell tower for the church and the town hall, as well as wiping away the entire towns of Parago, Rivalto, and Villanova and Fay. The official death toll for the disaster stands at 1,917 people, according to government sources, but it is likely the death toll is significantly higher. At least 350 entire families were killed in the disaster. Now, this feels like it was a catastrophic disaster that could not have been avoided. The problem with that is the entire thing absolutely could have been avoided. At least, the deaths could have been avoided. From almost the very moment construction started on the Vajont Dam, known as one of the tallest dams in the entire world at 262 meters tall, things were really bad. The electric company tasked with building the dam claimed that studies had been done to prove that the mountain was stable. That was a lie. Construction started in 1957, and by 1959, the nearby mountain was clearly moving. Cracks appeared all over the side of the mountain next to the dam. These were ignored. 3 separate engineers informed the agency that if the dam were completed and water was funneled in behind the dam, there was a major risk for a huge landslide with part of the mountain coming down. This was also ignored. Construction was completed and water was added beginning in 1960, and that's when the landslides really started. Reporters attempted to write about the landslides, but the government had them silenced for upsetting the social order. That is a direct quote. Over the next 3 years, earthquakes and landslides would be the norm for the mountain behind the Vajont Dam. Terrified townspeople regularly complained and were ignored. On the 15th of September, 1963, just a little less than a month before the disaster, the massive side of the mountain moved downhill 22 centimeters. It was after this point that the electric company decided to lower the water level in an attempt to prevent the water from overtopping the dam in case the landslide did happen, but it was too little, too late. There was no attempt to warn townspeople. There was no attempt to warn anyone working on the dam. Engineers for the electric company gathered on a nearby mountainside to watch as the mountain gave way and well over 2,000 people were killed. The government immediately ruled it to be a tragic and unavoidable disaster. A government-run newspaper called it a mysterious act of God's love. Several engineers would get very light punishments, but that was pretty much the end of it. The majority of the dam actually ended up remaining standing and is still in place today, but is not used as a dam. So, real quick, we're going to go look at this one in Google Earth because this one is fascinating. So, right here is the town of Longarone. You can see it right there, nestled in the valleys of Italy in northern Italy, right? It's a picturesque image, right? Fantastic. Right here, can't really see because it's not been 3D imaged. Let me move my circle out of the way. Right here is the Vajont Dam. It is 820 feet tall, about 260 meters. If you look at this from the town of Longarone, you can see how this would be terrifying to look at. The dam is just right there, right in here. Now, if we look at the backside of this, and you can kind of see it you see how this is all filled in with debris, right? There's the dam. All of this is filled in with debris. This was all entirely water. The entire side of the mountain, this whole section right here, is the landslide. It slid directly down into here and completely filled the entire lake. You can see some of the water is back here. But that entire section of the dam, the mountain completely slid down into the area behind the dam. Displaced the water, washed it out, washed away Longarone, Villanova, Fay, all through this area. Killed well over 2,000 people, completely killed 350 families. There is a photo, and I will find it here in just a second, that shows the actual dam from the town of Longarone. And the photograph shows how high the water would have reached. So here we have our photo. This is standing from inside of the town of Longarone. You can see the dam right here. Right here. This is the dam, all of it. The water would have reached when it slid down, when the mountain slid down over here. This is the area where the landslide occurred. Slid down over here. The water would have splashed up and would have been about even with about right here as a wall of water as it came towards the town itself. Now, the interesting part about this, one of the interesting parts about this, I should say, is that it didn't all move at once. On September 15th, it moved down about 22 centimeters. By the final several days before the disaster, it was moving about a meter per day, which doesn't feel like a lot when it's a whole mountain moving. But when you think about it, it is quite a lot when an entire mountain is moving. So there was plenty of warning that this was going to be a catastrophe. Now, there were several engineers that attempted to do some calculations to determine just how much water would be displaced if the mountain itself had given way and fallen into the lake. They were way off on their calculations. They only ended up moving the water level down from the top of the dam about 85-ish feet or so, which they believed would be more than enough to prevent it from overtopping the dam. But the wave that was created by the landslide moving that created the mega tsunami ended up being about a quarter of a kilometer in height, which is very, very high. Now, I use the phrase mega tsunami because this is, by definition, a mega tsunami. There is a lot of belief that if you have a big enough earthquake, you can have a mega tsunami. And it is both true and not true at the same time. So it's true in the sense that an earthquake can create a mega tsunami. It is not true in the sense that the earthquake itself is what causes the mega tsunami. What causes the mega tsunami is something on land slipping off and falling into water. So in this case, this wasn't caused by an earthquake. This was caused by the water filling in and dropping the landslide down. But there were numerous earthquakes prior to this that were indicative of the mountainside sliding down. This one slid down in the water, caused a massive wave because of the displacement of all that water that fell over and fell into town. There was a massive earthquake in Alaska in 1964 that displaced a large side of the mountain, which fell in the water and made a wave about 1,000 feet tall. There's no physical way for an earthquake to be large enough to create 1,000-foot tsunami. It can create a 150-foot tsunami, but you can't create a mega tsunami with just an earthquake. It's created by something falling into the water, which then displaces the water and creates that massive wave. So this was a mega tsunami because half of a mountain fell into a giant lake of water that was several hundred feet deep that was being held back by a dam. Now, what's fascinating is the dam itself didn't break. They lost a little bit of the top portion of the dam, but they ended up repairing it, not replacing it as a dam. It's basically used as a memorial at this point. But again, Basically, no one was punished in the aftermath of this disaster, especially because it was the 60s in Italy. The guy that originally did that controlled the company that made the dam itself was the finance minister for Benito Mussolini. So, like, things were not great in Italy at the time, and pretty much everyone ignored it as soon as it happened. It got some coverage outside of Italy. There were several U.S. military helicopters that came in and flew in and rescued people that were trapped by mud and debris and water in several towns, but that was pretty much the end of it. And it's been more or less argued against by a lot of Italian authorities since then, from creating memorials and things like that. They basically just wanted to move on from it. And then our last disaster this week is the Hard Rock Hotel collapse. On October 12, 2019, the Hard Rock Hotel that was under construction in New Orleans, Louisiana, suddenly collapsed on one side of the 16th floor, killing 3 construction workers and injuring several dozen others. The building was to be an 18-story high-rise that was 190 feet tall. During the design phase, several requests were made by the owner of the building for various changes that would require smaller steel beams be used along the ceilings to allow room for higher ceilings on the 16th and 17th floors. These steel beams were effectively halved in size, going from 21 inches thick to 10 inches thick, but no additional beams were added to account for the loss of strength. In addition, along the Rampart Street side of the building, where the collapse originated, the original drawings called for 11 steel columns that were 10 inches wide. This was subsequently changed to steel columns that were 6 inches wide. More columns should have been added to account for this change, at least 13 more columns, but only 1 more was added. This meant that there was not nearly enough support on this wall for the concrete that was poured for the 2 floors above it. On top of the complete lack of support for the building, there were several locations where holes for structural bolts should have gone through the column and beams for the floor, but the holes did not properly line up, so crews welded them instead. So they originally were supposed to put bolts through the holes and then tighten them down, but they couldn't fit the bolts through the holes, so they just welded them together instead, which is not nearly as strong as a bolt. The concrete for the 17th and 18th floors were poured on October 5th, 2019. By October 10th, several construction workers recorded videos of steel columns on the 16th floor bending under the weight of the added load. And then on the 12th, it would end up collapsing, killing the 3 construction workers. Now, the investigation and litigation into the collapse is still ongoing, so we don't have an official conclusion for what caused this particular disaster. But we can make some assumptions based on video footage of the disaster. So this right here, is the 16th floor of the building. Now, originally, across the 16th floor on this side of the building where the collapse occurred, there were supposed to be 11 beams, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 beams across that were 20 inches thick. So this is the side of the building that collapsed. Right here is the 16th floor where the collapse originated. There are multiple videos showing the actual collapse itself as it comes down. Now, this was originally designed to have 11 columns of 10-inch thick steel. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I could never do that again if I tried. 11 columns of 10-inch thick steel. But during design, this was changed from 10-inch thick to 6-inch thick, which more or less halves the strength of the steel. As such, they should have added significantly more columns to support all of the concrete floors that would have been above this floor of the structure itself. Instead of doing that, they should have added, it should have been 24 in total. Instead of making it 24, they added 1 more. So it was 12. That is not nearly enough. So in the days before the collapse, these steel beams that were through this area started to bend in various directions like this. There are numerous videos from construction workers showing supporting columns in this area starting to bend and basically talking about how dangerous it was. In addition, the columns that were here were supposed to go to beams that went across like this. They were originally supposed to be 21 inches thick. However, the owner of the building wanted the ceilings in the 16th and 17th floors to be higher. So they changed the beams from 21 inches thick to 10 inches thick, which gives them 11 extra inches of ceiling height. The problem with that is they never redid the calculation to determine where the bolt holes were going to be to connect these columns to the actual beams running across the actual floor. Floor joists is the word I want. They never actually redid the calculation to re-drill the holes so they could put the bolts through. So when the construction workers put up the beams and then put the floor joists across, they didn't line up. So instead of trying to fix it, they just welded them together. Now, welds are not nearly as strong as bolts. So then, on October 12th, after several of these columns had started to bend, it eventually collapsed, dropping down onto the ground and then killing the 3 construction workers and injuring several more. Now, again, OSHA has not officially released their report on this disaster yet, so we do not have an official conclusion from OSHA into this investigation. However, there have been numerous reports on this is what happened. In addition, you can watch the video and see the actual collapse itself happen. So we watched the video here. If you look right here along this right here, you can see how it's already starting to bow. This crane is slightly at an angle here already as this video starts, and you're going to see it kind of collapse down in here. You could see right, this column right here is starting to bow as well. And then the collapse, so this is the top floor, the 17th, the 18th, 17th, 16th. Here is your collapse floor. You can already see it starting to bow right here. If we play the video here, you can see how it comes down. Now, we go back a little bit. If you watch, these 2 floors right here kind of come down together as one. And this floor right here is where the collapse originates. So if we go ahead and press play again, they kind of come down as one, then the rest of the upper portion begins to collapse down. You can see here as well as it collapsed down and the crane falls across the street. So basically what happened is there were too few and too small of steel members in that area to be able to support the upper levels of the actual building itself. Now, one of the horrifying parts of this disaster is because of the instability of the structure and because there was so much issues getting it to be safe to actually collect the 2 deceased individuals. One individual in particular, his legs were visible from the street for approximately 10 months after the disaster. And with that, we've reached the end of this week's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, remember to like, subscribe, comment, do all those things. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, stay safe and remember to check your smoke detector batteries.